I was at Toronto International Film Festival and I saw a bunch of movies. Let's talk about them. One film I watched was La Jauría. This is the feature-length debut from director Andres Ramirez Pulido, and it won the grand prize for the Critics Week section of Cannes Film Festival. And after watching the film, I could really understand why. It is very well shot and makes great use of its limited locations. The way things are framed allows for a good showcase of nature in each shot. There's a great sense of atmosphere with effective music and competent sound design. But what prevented me from really loving this film was the writing. It felt like it really lacked character in the literal sense. They didn't feel distinct or memorable, and at many points they felt interchangeable. The pacing and structure of this film could also use a lot of improvement. The entire first half of this film felt unfocused and lacking narrative direction. Sure, there were some interesting concepts and ideas, but there wasn't really much of a hook to the film. As the film went on, it started getting interesting and exhilarating, and then it ended and it left me wanting more. It felt like the first 2/3 of this movie should have been the first act, and the last third of the movie should have been the second act, and then should have continued into a new, real third act. There are some shots and sequences in the second half of this film that are legitimately incredible. This director undeniably has a skillful presentation, but I wish that it was serving a better narrative. It was still interesting and thought-provoking, and it was worth getting to the end, but I really wish it was something more. Still, it was pretty fantastic for a first feature. There was some really interesting and effective visual reincorporation, and the acting was good from what I could tell. Although I won't be seeing this film again, I'm excited to see what this director makes next. There was a lot of great stuff in here, so I see a lot of potential. So yeah, check this one out if you want. I thought it was worth watching, and I'm giving this one a 6 out of 10. Another film I watched is Godland by Icelandic director Hlynur Pálmason. This film is about a Danish priest in the late 19th century traveling to Iceland to spread the word of God. And this is a film that I really loved. This is a masterfully directed film with amazing visuals. It is one of the best looking films of the past decade. If most directors were given the exact same Icelandic scenery to work with, they wouldn't know how to properly utilize it. In this film, there is a clear level of talent going into setting up and filming each shot. It looks incredible, and there are some shots in this film that are genuinely breathtaking. The acting was all fantastic. The costumes and props and set design all felt really genuine. This film is dripping with character and authenticity, and it provides perspective into not just the characters in the film, but also people in real life who have undoubtedly gone through similar situations. The music in this film is also great. It is very ominous sounding, and it's used sparingly and appropriately. On a technical level, this film is really incredible. Still, this film could have been better for me had I found a bit more personal, emotional connection with it. Although most might find this film slow, I found it to be interesting and engaging throughout, but I didn't find myself emotionally relating to it as much as I could have. There are powerful moments and there are disturbing visuals, there are interesting and memorable characters, but maybe what was missing for me was a character to personally attach onto. I'm not sure. Who knows, maybe I'll change my mind on a second watch. Apparently I was the only one in the theater that really liked the film. Most people started leaving not when the credits hit, but when it felt like the movie was ending. It was also the only screening at the entire film festival where I was the only person clapping. I got maybe a couple out and then stopped. It was kind of awkward. So yeah, I guess if you're not used to slow art films, maybe this is not the one to start with, but personally this is not even close to the slowest films I've seen, and there is such an insane amount of talent and ambition going into each scene that I found myself to be entertained throughout. This is an incredibly made film, and I am very excited to see the director's previous works and whatever he makes next. So yeah, check this one out if you want, and I'm giving this one an 8 out of 10. It's probably closer to a 9 than a 7. Another film I saw was Wendell Wild. This is the newest film from director Henry Selick, who hasn't directed a feature since Coraline. He also directed The Nightmare Before Christmas. So yeah, it goes without saying that the animation was great and it felt very nostalgic. The characters Wendell and Wild are demons played by Keegan-Michael Key and Jordan Peele. And Jordan Peele also has a writing credit for this film. Key and Peele's characters were fun to watch and their voice acting was appropriate, but despite the title, they are not really the main character. The main character of this film is Kat, played by Lyric Ross, and she's kind of annoying. They tried really hard to make her seem cool, but that didn't fix that there's not much to her character at all, and it really does not help that her voice acting absolutely sucks. I have no idea who Lyric Ross is, but watching the film made me feel as though the casting decision was made out of nepotism. It was impossible to believe a single word she said, and yeah, I know her character isn't written that well either, so she didn't have much to work with. Either way, her character's presence on screen is lame and irritating. There are important moments that are supposed to define her character that theoretically should be somewhat emotional, but the way her character acts and sounds makes it impossible to feel anything. Even ignoring the character and voice acting, the tone of these scenes just feels so weird. On paper, they're supposed to be showing us a traumatic event that's shaped the character, but in practice, they were too scared to allow the audience to feel anything real. There are many points throughout the film where it feels like they intentionally nerfed the writing and experience for the sake of children, and it sucks because you don't have to do that, especially in a film that's evoking all of this gothic imagery. Like, fuck, it's even rated PG-13, so there's no excuse why your writing and presentation should feel so dumbed down. And don't get me wrong, it's not like every scene in the movie is like this, but it happened enough that it really did not do the film any favors. The plot of this film also felt way too derivative. There's a bad corporation and a conspiracy because they want money and blah 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 blah. And there's nothing about a cliched story that doesn't allow room to feel emotions, but it feels like they actively prevented it throughout the film. There are several moments in the film where it feels like they made the decision to not allow us to experience the true emotions of the characters and story. The story is also not tight at all. There are resolutions to conflicts that feel disappointing, and it constantly feels like there isn't much significance at all to the choices in the writing, both in narrative and dialogue. Now, although there is a lot to complain about with this film, it is not all bad. The Key and Peele scenes are pretty watchable, and there were plenty of jokes that were genuinely funny to me. There were some humorous concepts and some watchable characters, but man, the core of this film was just so underwhelming. I really wish it was something more because there was a lot of potential here. I loved the animation, but the writing felt unconfident and immature. So yeah, check this one out if you want. There's plenty of people who enjoyed it. As for me, it was kind of forgettable. I won't be seeing it again, and I'm giving this one a 5 out of 10. It's closer to a 4 than a 6. Another film I saw was How to Blow Up a Pipeline by Daniel Goldhaber, the director of Cam. Now, I remember enjoying Cam, although it was not perfect. It was a pretty interesting, low-budget horror movie type thing. How to Blow Up a Pipeline was also pretty good, but it is more of a heist movie. It's like if the Ocean's 11 crew were eco-terrorists. So yeah, this movie is about characters who want to blow up a pipeline in order to make a protest statement about oil. The Earth is dying, and they feel as though drastic measures need to be taken. The characters in this movie are often kind of annoying, but believable. There's a good chunk of stupid and entirely preventable decisions that these characters make, but despite these characters being kind of dumb, it still feels like they're real characters. The way they were written was appropriate, and some of the performances were really great. In terms of a narrative, this film was probably the easiest to follow out of everything at the festival. This film was not boring, although it was somewhat repetitive and one-note. The cast of characters together made for a pretty good ensemble, and the music also helped the film, and I thought it was pretty great. Now, this film is not a satire or anything. It kind of feels like it exists to inspire people to take up eco-terrorism. So yeah, a little controversial to say the least. It probably won't get a huge release anywhere, but I guess you never know. As a film, I thought it was pretty solid, and it was an interesting direction for this director to take. It didn't blow me away, and I'll probably never see it again, but it was pretty well made and not boring. So yeah, check this one out if you want, and I'm giving this one a 6 out of 10. Another film I saw was The Whale, starring Brendan Fraser, directed by Darren Aronofsky. Now, this film has quite the level of buzz around it, with Brendan Fraser being a huge part of that, and I've got to say this is easily my favorite performance from him. He truly gave it his all, and I'm sure that working with Aronofsky played a big part in that. There are moments from his performance in this film that are burned into my memory. There are line deliveries that feel borderline traumatizing, and the music and camera work greatly added to this experience. Aronofsky is a very expressive director. He has an incredible sense of how to use music and editing to help convey the emotions of the film. The film has great sound design with subtle audio cues to foreshadow and emphasize ideas that are explored later. The music in this film is incredible. It feels both familiar and unique simultaneously. Come to think of it, the overall experience of this film feels both simultaneously familiar and unique. There are quite a few aspects of this film that feel silly silly and cliched, but the overall presentation helps build it up into something so much more than it would have been otherwise. Conceptually and narratively, it's not exactly working with the best foundation, but the undeniable talent and passion that went into this project helped turn it into something that I really love. It is super emotional and very effective in its delivery. It is heartbreaking and empathetic. Each performance in this film was great, and there were incredibly strong and memorable characters. It is not a perfect film, and it can feel unintentionally comical at points, but even so, it never robs from the overall experience. I was honestly kind of worried near the beginning. It opens up in a very weirdly silly way, and the first time we see the fat suit that Brendan Fraser is in is the most unrealistic that it looks. I was like, uh-oh, what's going on? But then in every subsequent scene, it looks perfectly convincing. You also really feel the weight from the physical performance. Honestly, Brendan Fraser was phenomenal in this movie. I really believed his character, which is not something that I can say for every film he's been in. Anyway, I thought this film was great, so yeah, check it out. Maybe not everybody will be able to take it seriously, but whatever. I can't wait to see it again, and I'm giving this one an 8 out of 10. Another film I saw was not a film, it was 2 episodes of the new upcoming season of The Kingdom, titled The Kingdom Exodus. This is a Danish television series created and directed by Lars von Trier, and this is the first season since 1997. So yeah, this was kind of a nostalgic blast to the past for me, although I did only start watching the show about a year or two ago. It was very interesting how he managed to keep the look and style and feel of the show. It's kind of weird to experience fan service-y type nostalgia bait, but for art house movie directors from like Danish television shows from the 90s, it's kind of weird. As expected, it gets pretty meta, it's a bit nonsensical also, and to be perfectly honest, it's not any less nonsensical if you've seen the first 2 seasons. I would still recommend watching the first 2 seasons, and if you enjoyed that, then watch this because it's just the same thing. The best way to describe it is that it's a hospital drama satire, but it's also a comedy and kind of a horror, kind of also. It is pretty bizarre. It is filled with characters who aren't exactly the best people. Honestly, the experience is kind of difficult to describe, so just watch it yourself if you want. Yeah, why am I even here? Get out of here, me. Fuck it. Shockingly, there's a lot of people that don't enjoy Lars von Trier's films that do enjoy this show. There's something about it that really speaks to general audiences despite how bizarre and weird it is. And perhaps this is also aided by its episodic format. Anyway, I really enjoyed this half season that they screened at TIFF. Apparently the rest of it will be released on Mubi this year, and I might wind up doing a watch-along to it, so if you want to join that live, then subscribe to the YMS Watch-Alongs channel and hit the bell, otherwise you cannot be upset that you missed it. Thank you. And I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10. Another film I saw was Moonage Daydream, directed by Brett Morgan. Now I remember enjoying his Kurt Cobain documentary in 2015, so with this one now being about David Bowie, I was excited to check this one out. Now I wouldn't consider myself to be a big fan of either of those artists. They make great music, I just haven't gone through the effort of listening to a full album from either of them. With the Kurt Cobain documentary, I really enjoyed the creative presentation, so with this Bowie film being official selection at Cannes Film Festival and edited for IMAX, made it pretty interesting. I actually wound up watching this at the Cinesphere IMAX, and it was a pretty incredible audiovisual experience. The film was mixed for 12.0 sound, it was very big, it was very loud, it was crazy. Now with this film being 2 hours and 15 minutes long, the novelty does wear off after a bit, and the way that this film is made, it's not really trying to exist as an informational documentary. There are interesting interview clips where Bowie talks about his music and philosophy, but the film never explores deeply into any of that. It's all just very surface level. If you're expecting to learn anything about Bowie by watching this documentary, you will be disappointed. Essentially, this movie is kind of like a big tribute video. Many of the scenes consist of concert footage where they just let the entire song play, and other scenes are just heavily edited, flashy, loud montages. Honestly, it kind of reminded me of that Life remote control film that Mr. Brainwash made in the documentary Exit Through the Gift Shop. Parts of it felt kind of ADHD, and parts of it seemed to go on forever, and it was honestly very poorly structured. The film is more or less chronological. About half of the movie is 70s Bowie, and about 30% of the movie is 80s Bowie, and then about 15% of the movie is 90s Bowie, and then about 5% of the movie is 2000s Bowie. And it's kind of insulting in a way. Like, sure, I guess a lot of boomers showing up to this film really want to see older Bowie, but even as a non-fan who's never listened to a full album, I am very much aware that his final album, Black Star, was a very important album. It was commercially successful and critically loved, and the film kind of just glosses over this entire period of his life. Like, yeah, I get that there's less footage, but if you're playing several full songs from the 70s and 80s, why wouldn't you just play one of his music videos from the new album? It wouldn't have felt out of place, because a lot of this documentary is just full songs. And even if you didn't want to do that, I don't see any excuses why 90s Bowie didn't get a lot of screen time. 90s Bowie is the Bowie that I'm least familiar with, so it was the most interesting part of the movie for me, and it was just quickly glossed over, which was kind of annoying. If you don't want to include Bowie's later works, then don't include them. It's weird how it was in the film when the way it's presented, it makes it seem like the director didn't want those things in there. With this film simultaneously trying to be both a rock concert and interview footage documentary, that in of itself sets up certain expectations that it winds up not meeting. It doesn't feel like it's informative, and it doesn't feel like it's a fair catalog of his works. This is basically a 2-hour and 15-minute long fancier version of those montages they do at the Oscars before introducing a category that they like. So yeah, this film was kind of disappointing to me. As a sensory experience alone, it was great up until a point. As a film, it's just fine. If this film were trimmed down by about 40 minutes, then maybe I would have enjoyed it more. At the beginning of the film, I was having real emotional reactions to parts. It felt like a genuine 8 out of 10, and then it just kept getting worse and worse as it went on. When I left the theater, it was a 6, and now retrospectively, it's a 5. So yeah, check this one out if you want. A lot of people seem to be really loving it. If you can see it in IMAX, do that, because most of what I enjoyed about this film was about the sound and visuals. So anyway, I'm giving this one a 5 out of 10, even though I said that, but I'm going to specify that it's closer to a 6 than a 4, I guess. Another film I saw was The Son by Florian Zeller. This is the same writer-director as The Father, which won Anthony Hopkins Best Actor at the Academy Awards. And although this film is not really a sequel, it is trying to be kind of a spiritual successor in a way. The Father is a film that explores Alzheimer's, and The Son is a film that explores teenage depression. This film is not bad at all conceptually, but the writing is much weaker than The Father. It's often extremely melodramatic and predictable, and there are many points in the film that are just flat-out cringeworthy. The best performance in this film would probably be from Hugh Jackman. He did a really fantastic job portraying his character, but unfortunately the titular son was not nearly as competent of an actor as he needed to be. For a younger performance, he was pretty good, but the role called for something great. The character gets a huge amount of screen time in the film, and the majority of it is him emotional and crying, but his acting is just not good enough for it to be wholly convincing. Watching his performance, and especially with the writing and how the character's feelings are justified, it makes it abundantly clear that the filmmakers do not understand teenage depression. It is kind of embarrassing how shallow and surface level and naive their representation of this is. It was pretty cringe. Much like The Father, everything looked great visually. The framing and color and lighting, I really loved how everything looked, and it was very visually appealing. But in terms of overall presentation, this film was really lacking compared to the creative choices that went into The Father. The reason why The Father was so effective at exploring Alzheimer's is because it puts you into the character's perspective. Scenes were intentionally edited in a confusing way where different actors would play the same character, and you as an audience member would be just as confused as the main character. And I can already imagine some people thinking, well, yeah, because that's Alzheimer's. Well, you can't really do anything like that for teenage depression, can you? But, yeah, you can. Color and lighting are easy things to be able to change to represent a character's feelings. The pacing of shots and how things are edited together can also help communicate emotion. But it was so bizarre watching this because in terms of presentation, everything stayed more or less consistent throughout the entire film. So there was no effort to help the audience get into the character's mind in this film. And with this film supposedly being a spiritual successor to The Father, it's weird that they didn't even try. The presentation was easily one of the most notable aspects of The Father, and they didn't even try to do anything like that in this film. So the end result is one where instead of the audience experiencing things through the character, we are just detached. We are just watching someone insist their experience instead of feeling it with them. And again, the performance is not that convincing. The only notable editing choice in this film was one that really did not work well at all. There was a perfectly good scene that was ruined by changing everything to slow motion and putting a Tom York song over top of it. I like Tom York, but it was a very awful choice. Without spoiling anything, I did really enjoy the ending of this film, and although this film fell insanely short of what it could have been, it does not feel poorly produced. It's got great production design, and I really do like the look of this film, even if they didn't didn't do anything unique or special with it. I didn't hate this film, but there's undeniably a lot about it that just does not work. So yeah, check this one out if you want. There were plenty of people in the theater that did seem to take it seriously the entire time, so who knows? As for me, I'm giving this one a 5 out of 10. It's closer to a 4 than a 6. After the Sun, I saw Aftersun. I'm actually not going to talk about this film very much because I'm planning on seeing it a second time at Vancouver Film Festival. Basically, this is a film from Scottish director Charlotte Wells, and it is kind of a slow movie, but there's things to read into about it. There are aspects to this film that are intriguing that I want to understand more. It is not the most entertaining film, but I feel like it's something that I'll get a bit more out of on a second watch. It is very much a female perspective film, if that makes any sense. I absolutely loved the music, the acting was good. There are some shots that are super purposeful and really well thought out, and there are other shots that don't look great, I guess. So yeah, I do have more to say about it, but stay tuned for my Vancouver Film Festival review where I will talk about it in a bit more detail. For now, I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10. Another film I saw was Manticore by Carlos Vermut. This is the same director as 2014's Magical Girl, which is a fantastic film that not enough people have seen, so please go watch it. Manticore is about a game designer who creates monsters, and that's about as much as I'm going to say about the plot. As more aspects of the story get revealed, it becomes quite the disturbing drama. Once this film gets to where it's going, it's really great, but my biggest complaint is that it takes forever to get there. There's not really enough relating to the core of this film until the last third of it, or at the very least explicitly. This is a film that I feel compelled to watch for a second time at some point, because perhaps the full understanding of what this movie is going for will better contextualize parts at the beginning. On a technical level, it looks nice, all of the performances are great, and it is refreshing to see a seemingly accurate portrayal of video game design. It's a very honest and authentic film. It is emotionally challenging. What this film eventually becomes is very interesting, and I wish it took up more of the film. It feels like the film could have explored so much more if it had just gotten there earlier. It is uncomfortable and morally nuanced, and yeah, I love what it turned into. So yeah, we'll see how I feel about this one on a second watch, but I'm not rushing back to see it. I really loved a lot about this film, I just wish it was structured differently. So yeah, check this one out if you want. It is not for everyone, and I'm giving this one a 6 out of 10. Another film I saw was the new Ruben Östlund film, Triangle of Sadness. This is the second time the director has won the Palme d'Or at Cannes Film Festival, with his previous film The Square winning in 2017. This is also the same director as Force Majeure, which was on my 2014 list. I've enjoyed every film I've seen from this director to different degrees, and honestly, this might be his best film. It's a very ambitious film that has a great sense of scale. There's a large cast of characters, and each one is very fun to watch. The acting is all fantastic, the writing is clever and hilarious. This is a comedic satire on wealth and societal status, and sure, some of the satirical aspects to the script are a bit on the nose, but I absolutely love the direction that it goes narratively, and it is a very, very funny film. This is a movie that really benefits from seeing it with a crowd of people, because this is a comedy that is incredibly outrageous and over the top. This is a film that does not hold back, and it is pretty awesome. I love the tone of the music in this film. It is pretty repetitive, but it doesn't quite pass the threshold for being annoying as opposed to infectious. The energy of the music really adds to the fun experience of the film. This film is not just over the top, but it is also humorous when it's being more subtle and awkward. There is also humor to be found in the dramatic elements of this film. Much of the experience is like watching a train wreck in slow motion. You can see the direction it's heading, and so many of the characters are just so awful, but that's the point. It is a pretty hysterical comedy, and I love the situations that these characters go through. I guess I should warn that if you're the type of person to throw up if you see someone else throw up, then maybe avoid this film. This film does show vomiting, and it is very convincing. It does not feel like fake movie vomiting, it feels real. So maybe just be prepared to close your eyes or something, I don't know. Anyway, I absolutely loved this film, and I thought it was very funny. So please check this one out whenever you can. It might be playing right now, depending on where you live. And I'm giving this one an 8 out of 10. It's closer to a 9 than a 7. Another film I saw was Holy Spider from Ali Abbasi, the director of Border. Border was a very weird movie that I would recommend watching without looking up too much about it, and this film was not really that weird at all. I honestly forgot it was the same director until right now. It is a very different film, and I'm glad to say that it also really works. This is a very well-acted film with the lead taking home Best Actress at Cannes Film Festival. This film is very much a crime horror movie, but it is also so much more than that. As a horror film, it is decent, but as a drama, it is excellent. Detached from the Islamic setting and feminist lens, the horror elements of this film are honestly pretty basic and familiar, but the dramatic elements of this film are just so intriguing. It is the overall perspective of the film that really makes this movie special. I'm not really going to spoil anything about the plot, so you're just going to have to check it out yourself, but what I will say is that the criticisms this film makes are pretty brave. It feels like a pretty important movie, and I'm glad that it was well made. So yeah, if this seems interesting to you, then check it out, and I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10. Another film I saw was Glass Onion, a Knives Out mystery. This is Rian Johnson's sequel to Knives Out, where Daniel Craig's detective character is solving another case. Now, I enjoyed Knives Out. I didn't think it was a masterpiece, but I had fun with it. And this film is also fun, but it's not nearly as compelling as the first film. Like many sequels, it tries a bit too hard to be more big and showy. Like, whoa, this is the second movie, so there's more things in it. But I think the overall simplicity of the first film helped its charm quite a bit. The mystery being solved in this film just really isn't as interesting as the first Knives Out. This is still a decently shot film with good music, and the cast was really fun to watch. Edward Norton in particular was pretty great for this role, and I think he works well for comedies in general. I should also mention that some of the CG effects were bad. The fake fire was obviously fake fire. Didn't ruin the movie, I guess, it's just kind of annoying. Anyway, I don't want to say too much about this film. It is kind of a mystery thing where you should just experience it for yourself. I don't plan on watching this again, but it wasn't a bad comedy, so check this one out if you want, and I'm giving this one a 6 out of 10. Another film I saw was VHS 99. This is the latest film in the anthology horror series known as VHS, where essentially the film plays 5 short horror segments from different directors, plus an in-between segment stitching them together. The first 2 VHS movies have some really great segments in them, my favorite being Amateur Night from David Bruckner in the first film. I cannot remember anything even remotely good in VHS Viral, and VHS 97 wasn't terrible. It happened again! It's not 97, it's 94. This is the second time I've done this. It is not the 97 movie. It is 94. Fuck! And VHS 94 wasn't terrible and did have some charm. I guess I'll just talk about the segments individually for this film, so here it goes. The first segment of this film was called Shredding, directed by Maggie Levin, and it was honestly absolute cancer. Every character was awful and irritating to watch. It had absolutely no comprehension of flow, pacing, humor, action, anything. It is one of those films that is just so horrendously incompetent that you have to make conscious efforts to try and piece together what exactly they were going for in any given moment. There were points where characters were being chased, and it took me a while to understand that that's actually what they were going for. Visually, there was barely any sense of movement. It was borderline incomprehensible. It was very cringe, it was very boring, and I couldn't wait for it to be over. The second segment was Suicide Bid, directed by Johannes Roberts. This segment was not super well made, but it had a good concept. A character is trapped in a coffin, yada yada yada. It was a little rough around the edges, but it was really refreshing after the first one. The third segment was Ozzy's Dungeon, directed by Flying Lotus. This segment was actually a lot of fun. Much of it parodied 90s kids game shows. I don't know if any of you were familiar with Uh-Oh, the Game Show starring Wink Yahoo, but that's what it reminded me of. I really loved how authentic it felt as a parody. It was very funny and bizarre. It kind of felt like a Tim and Eric sketch at points. It also had a very funny ending and last shot. This segment survives on its humor and authenticity. The fourth segment was The Gawkers, directed by Tyler McIntyre. This segment also felt like it had a good amount of 90s authenticity. It was effective at its humor and not so effective at being scary, but it was still fun overall. I was not really a big fan of how some of the CG looked in this segment also, but yeah, overall it was not bad and it was pretty entertaining. The fifth segment was called To Hell and Back, directed by Joseph and Vanessa Winter, and if you watched my Fantasia Festival 2022 video, you'll remember them from me talking about their film Deadstream. Daydream. Deadstream was awesome, and you should check it out on Shudder when it's released on October 6th. Anyway, this segment is definitely the best one to end the film on. It is not only the most ambitious, but it is the most effective as well. It easily has the best practical effects out of every segment, and it was really refreshing because many of the other segments had creatures that were obviously just some person wearing a bad zombie costume, but this segment actually had cool, good-looking creatures. It was funny, it worked well as a short. My only real complaint is that some of the weapons didn't feel too convincing as they were being used, but overall I was really impressed and I'm excited to see whatever they make next. I should also mention that the in-between segments, stitching everything together, were pretty hilarious. So yeah, VHS 99 starts out very, 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 very fucking rough, but it does redeem itself by the end of it, and there is some good stuff in there. So yeah, if this seems interesting to you, then check it out. It'll be on Shudder on October 20th. If I were to rate each of these segments individually, I would say probably 1, 4, 6, 5, high 6. So yeah, the first segment is dragging down my overall rating of the film. So overall, I give this one a 5 out of 10. Another film I saw was The Fabelmans, directed by Steven Spielberg. It is a fictional, semi-autobiographical story loosely based on Steven Spielberg's childhood, and it was soulless, cynical, Oscar bait bullshit. It was a very safe, crowd-pleasing film that didn't say much of anything at all. There were some scenes that were cringeworthy, there were some that were overdramatic. It was an unchallenging film that was mostly boring and eye-rolling. The technical elements of the film were mostly great. I really enjoyed Paul Dano's performance, and the main kid actor was also good. It had decent lighting and great production design. Seth Rogen was in the film. He was annoying. One of my biggest problems with this film is just how fucking phony it feels, made all the more worse by how much it insists otherwise. One of the scenes has the main actor filming a movie as a child and saying things like, it's not real enough, it's fake, I gotta do more to make it less fake. As if Spielberg as a director has some sort of undying principle for realism in his films. This film itself feels very phony. The character is constantly shooting footage with old film and old cameras, and it plays much of this footage in the movie, and it looks way too modern. They clearly did not shoot it with those cameras. It looks very fake. There are driving scenes in this film that are painfully obvious in how green screened they are, and if it were more consistent, then maybe I'd be able to believe that it's an intentional choice because it's a movie about making movies, I guess. But it's not consistent at all, just some of the shots look bad. The last shot of the film looks fake as fuck, and there are good elements to this shot and how it's used in the story, but when it's supposed to be a real environment and most of it looks digital, it's kind of annoying. Without spoiling anything, there's a great cameo appearance near the end of the film. That scene was particularly enjoyable, but then the movie just ends. It genuinely felt like this entire film was a 2.5 hour long first act. It felt like there was another 2/3 of the story missing, but it just cut to credits. So yeah, I'm not really a huge fan of this film. Everybody else seems to be enjoying it, so fuck it. Most modern Spielberg films feel so cynical and annoying to me. When I watch a film, I want to see something genuine, and it's particularly frustrating when this film is masquerading as such. Anyway, that's just my interpretation, so feel free to have your own. And I'm giving this one a 5 out of 10. Another film I saw was The Banshees of Inisherin by Martin McDonagh. This is the same director as In Bruges and 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, which are both films that I would recommend. This film in particular feels like a very different direction, but it works so well. This is a black comedy drama set in 1920s Ireland, where two friends start having some issues with each other. This film is very, very funny, but it is also incredibly heartbreaking. The writing is fantastic, the characters are fun, endearing, and memorable. The performances in this film are superb. Colin Farrell truly transformed into his character, and it's pretty insane noting the contrast between this and the Batman. In some ways, this feels similar to other characters he's played, but the differences are found in the subtleties in his performance, and it's all very consistent. Everyone does a fantastic job, but Colin Farrell really steals the show here. His proficient and mature performances in the past year have really solidified him as one of the best actors working today. I love that this film has strong themes and that there's plenty to absorb and think about. It's not just a great narrative, but it's a film that's actually trying to say something. The scenery of this film is also very well captured through its cinematography. The time and location are very well expressed, and they both play a very important character in the film. My only real complaint in the film was some CG fire that I wish didn't look like CG fire, but aside from that, everything was pretty phenomenal. Word of advice, if you're not Irish, you might need subtitles for this film. There were honestly a couple lines here and there that I missed because of the accents, but I don't think it was anything crucial. Either way, I'll be seeing this film once again very soon, so I can't wait to experience it once more. Check this one out whenever you can. I thought it was absolutely fantastic, and I'm giving this one a 9 out of 10. Another film I saw was Joyland. This is a Pakistani story about a man who falls in love with a trans dancer. I really like the look of the film, and for the most part it has great lighting, color, and framing. The 4:3 aspect ratio is also interesting. It's shot in a way that feels both natural and professional. In some ways this feels like almost a Bollywood movie because there is a lot of dancing, but in this story it's a bit more diegetic because the story itself revolves around dancers. Still, despite this, I can't say I was too interested in those scenes. I've always been kind of annoyed by that in Bollywood films, and it wasn't that much of an exception here. And despite loving the look of the film for the most part, there were some scenes where it just didn't work very well at all. There was a scene where an area was supposed to be lit by several people's cell phones, but there was obviously so much more studio lighting, like it wasn't being lit by people's cell phones at all. So that was kind of annoying, and I wish they put in the extra effort to make that look a bit more believable. I also feel like the runtime is way too long for what the story is. It takes way too long to do what it's doing, and it's definitely not saying anything that justifies the over 2 hour long runtime. It is not a bad movie by any means, but I was really getting impatient with it. I wish I was more engaged in the story because there were things I liked in it, but over time it was starting to feel pretty basic outside of the trans subject matter. So yeah, not a bad film, it just wasn't for me. I was not really paying too hard of attention to it by the end of it, so check this one out if you want. Maybe you'll enjoy it more than I did. It won a couple of awards at Cannes, so anyway, I'm giving this one a 6 out of 10. It's closer to a 5 than a 7. And the last film I saw at Toronto Film Festival was the new Werner Herzog documentary, Theater of Thought. Not every Herzog documentary is fantastic, but I really enjoy watching them regardless. He always lets his personality shine through in the subjects he covers. He has a good sense of humor, and he's kind of a weirdo, so I'm always interested in seeing what he makes. This film explores ideas surrounding the human brain. It talks about neural machines and brain and spine implants for people with chronic pain or even Parkinson's. It also explores things like, yo, what if we put mice in VR? This documentary was super interesting and very informational, but it does lack the heightened sense of atmosphere found in some of his other documentaries. It is still artistic and poetic like many of his other documentaries, although also not as much. This film is a great collection of thoughts and ideas, but there's not a huge sense of flow or narrative. It honestly feels like it would have been more appropriate as a TV special rather than a film. Still, I really enjoyed this documentary. It doesn't have the same rewatchability as some of his other films does, but it was good. And I'm giving this one a 6 out of 10. It's closer to a 7 than a 5. Well, that about does it for Toronto Film Festival 2022. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Adam, how could you have gone to Toronto Film Festival but not see Decision to Leave, or Broker, or RMN, or EO? So don't worry, as I'll be catching those at Vancouver Film Festival very soon, so stay tuned. Thank you very much for your support. Check out my other channels in the sidebar thing, please. Thank you, bye-bye. Okay,
again.
Oh, shit! Sorry. We got it. As soon as I exit first person, you're aiming, you shoot at my feet, which is the funniest,
is very stupid.
Funniest thing, and it makes this co-op thing we're doing awful.
Nearly impossible.